I hope you're enjoying your lunch and continue to eat and also have the dessert. But we also have a special dessert for you. Before I introduce our keynote speaker for today, I welcome everybody back and recognize His Excellency Ambassador of Egypt, Mohammed Tawfiq, who joined us. Thank you for joining us here. Our keynote speaker today, Dr. Ambassador Salama Shaker, as well, like many of us, but even more, has a special relationship to Professor Saeed, and I'm sure she will relate to that in her keynote. Allow me to briefly just share with you some of her work and background. Her Excellency Ambassador Salama Shaker was the first appointed woman Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Americas in the history of the Egyptian Foreign Ministry. She was appointed Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs or for Cultural, Educational Relation and Technical Cooperation and Dialogue for Egypt in summer 2004. For 4 years prior to that, she was Egypt's ambassador to Canada. In addition to her current post, she was also held several positions within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including Deputy Minister for North and Latin America, advisor to the Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs on Egyptian-American Relations and NATO, First Secretary at the Office of Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs, and attaché at the Soviet desk within the ministry. Between 1985 and 90, Dr. Shaker served as the Consul General in Washington as well. She also served as economic and political counselor at the embassy in Turkey, as well as cultural and political attaché at the Embassy of Egypt in Malta. Her education background, she began her education at American College for Girls in Cairo, Egypt. She went on to earn her bachelor in political economy at Cairo University, and also held 2 master's degrees in political economy and economics from Johns Hopkins University and London School of Economy University. In 1993, actually, she was here at the at the American University and received her PhD in international development from our university here. And she was a senior associate at the Woodrow Wilson Center here in town between 92 and 94, where she did her research on impact of the first Gulf War on the economies of Egypt and Turkey. Many publications, I will not go through them, forgive me for that, but we're delighted that you accepted to share your experience.
Thanks all, and salam. Peace be upon you. My mentor, my professor, my muallim, ambassador of peace, muallimi wa ustazi, Professor Abdulaziz Said, distinguished guests, dear friends, my very dear Ambassador Tawfiq, Ambassador of Egypt to the United States of America, my dear Elena. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be here in this very inspirational setting, which brings back to me the most treasurable memories of my school years. My husband Ghalib and I are elated to celebrate with all of you the legacy of my muallim. Please allow me to share with you the words of one of the most prominent Arab poets in the Arab world who said, قم للمعلم وزد التبجيل كاد المعلم أن يكون رسولا. Stand up for the professor and keep on praising him. The muallim is almost a prophet. My dear muallim, in the inspirational book, The Prophet, Khalil Gibran was asked to describe the qualities of the inspiring teacher. Gibran said, "The teacher is he who walks in the shadow of the temple among the followers, gives not of his wisdom, but rather of his faith and his lovingness. If he is indeed wise, he does not bid you enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your own mind. My dear Professor, Ustazi wa Muallimi, that is exactly what you have done to me when you opened the threshold of your knowledge and wisdom. You took me by the hand when all seemed foggy and when my dreams to obtain my doctoral degree were being crushed. I could hardly see any light at the end of a dark tunnel. You opened your doors and your heart, and you listened to me. You reassured me that despite of being a diplomat who is entrenched in world politics and embassy work, obtaining my degree at American University will be my reward of hard work that will make me an effective and empowered diplomat and a global citizen. Yes, my dear mentor, you believed in me, and I learned from you that leadership is empowerment. You taught me what makes a strong leader from the power of the 99 beautiful names of God, as inscribed in the Quran. I still remember the glittering sparkle in your eyes when I mentioned to you that my husband's name is Ghalib Abdul Rahman. You said your famous word in Arabic, ma'loom, ma'loom, and reminded me that Ghalib Abdul Rahman means the compassionate conqueror who will always serve with compassion his community and his loved ones. You assured me that my husband will sacrifice and be my support throughout the challenging years of studying for my doctoral degree. It was like you had a crystal ball in your hands. In your classes, you taught me what I'm teaching now from your books and narratives, and I quote, "A leader becomes a guardian of the public interest of the community. However, leaders need both humility and dignity and a vision. Leaders are consensus builders at each stage in the confidence building process and in reaching for peace." My dear Muallim, you inspired me and you trained me to become, just as you told me, an effective diplomat. You showed me the path to follow your steps in public diplomacy and taught me how to be a negotiator for peace and conflict resolution. I feel humbled by your presence. But I would like to share with all of you, my very dear friends and colleagues, how I was able to wear my other hat, the academic hat, because of my mentor and inspirer, Professor Said. You inspired me to be a peace activist and reminded me that my name means peace. And I followed your message and became a peace activist and wore my academic hat and taught at Yale University and followed your steps and shared with my students your wisdom in addressing many of their questions, such as how to build bridges between the West and the Muslim world after the horrific events of the 11th of September 2001, and why should the West trust the Muslims? I quoted your narrative from your book, Islam and Peacekeeping, in which you say, and I quote, "Rather than framing Islam primarily as a basis of radicalism, let us use an approach which recognizes Islam as a system of social values with relevance to peacemaking. Let us realize that when we are trapped by stereotypes, we lose sensitivity to understanding the real core of Islam, which is based on social justice and peace. My dear Muallim, you said to me, and here I'm repeating it again, how can we judge more than 1 billion Muslims of crimes not committed by them and forget that militants and fanatics fill our world with hideous crimes against humanity? Peacemaking between the Islamic world and the West requires willingness from the West to acknowledge the human values in the Muslim world and the civilization of the Muslims. My Muallim, you emphasized that in order to achieve inner peace, we need to believe in our human values. The Quran frequently cautions humankind against going to excess in pursuing rights or correcting injustices. Peace is not the absence of war, but it is a transformational process at all levels of our being. So I asked my professor, my Muallim, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the concept of comprehensive negotiated settlement, and how can we apply the non-violence paradigm to this ongoing conflict. And my Muallim said, with all his positive wisdom, give peacemaking a chance, and the two-state solution will be achieved. And the symbolism of sulh, reconciliation, is very important if built on justice for the Palestinian people and security for Israel and Palestine. Peace, after all, is a transformation process, which means adoption of the comprehensive understanding of a just peace that can stop the wrongs of the past and provides closure and accountability, where comprehensive and sustainable peace can be attainable when Palestinian rights are recognized and acknowledged regionally and globally. The two-state solution will be the prize for all in spite of all challenges. Justice shall prevail. When asked about building bridges between East and West in 2010 at a conference held at the University of Yale in coordination with the Library of Alexandria of Egypt, my Muallim emphasized, and I quote, "To support democratic change and human rights, Western countries have to realize that change cannot be preached. Change has to come from within in Muslim lands where radicalization of young Muslim men is being targeted. Supporting internal developments demands addressing needs of the people." My Muallim emphasized that active listening is an invaluable skill for conflict resolution, and the need to cultivate a sustained dialogue. My mentor and my Muallim, you were able, with your spiritual antenna, to foresee the uprisings of 2011 in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Yemen, and Syria because of the injustices. And you argued, and I quote, "the need to listen and understand the agonies and the cultures and experiences and aspirations and voices that come from the people in the Middle East. You emphasize that the Muslim world, in order to build a positive dialogue based on enduring partnerships and equality and social justice and a sustainable dialogue, we all need to reach our dreams. And the dreams of the new future will need to be achieved. Having mentioned sustainable dialogue and dreams, I would like to share with all of you, dear friends and colleagues, how my Muallim kept on mentoring me throughout the years. He fulfilled the promise he gave me when he and Elena celebrated my graduation in the lovely, warm home in 1993, where you, my dear Muallim, set the agenda of our meeting as usual by asking, what's next? And when will I write my book? How will I be pursuing my diplomatic career and pursue my academic achievements and share my knowledge with my colleagues at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with scholars and students? Yes, my dear teacher, my Muallim, you inspired me to be what I am. You were elated when I published my first book on state-society privatization and rent-seeking in Turkey. You celebrated my position as first Egyptian woman, Muslim, Arab, African ambassador to Canada. And later, as Dr. Abu Nimr mentioned, the first woman in the history of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt to be Deputy Minister for the Americas. And here I have to mention a very dear mentor of mine in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, Minister Amr Moussa, who became later the Secretary General of the League of Arab Nations, and actually he presided on the 50 members committee that drafted the new constitution of Egypt. So between my dear Muallim and my mentor in the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, and my dear colleague, actually, Ambassador Tawfiq, who was here when we celebrated our marriage in Washington, D.C., which my Muallim, actually, and Elena attended. So here, it's always important to bring back all these cherishable memories. And indeed, I will never forget your call when I became the first Muslim Egyptian professor at Yale University. And indeed, that was and I was very humbled by your call because you told me you fulfilled, but there's still more. And that's what I'm trying to do now at Claremont Graduate University, to do the more steps. My dear inspirer, your greeting words, Mabrook, Mabrook, still ring in my ears. Muallimi, when I asked you to advise me how to manage crisis and build bridges in a turbulent world after the 11th of September horrific events, and at that time I was the ambassador of Egypt to Canada, you emphasized that we need to share our stories and open channels of communication and reaching out. And you reminded me of the importance of public diplomacy. And indeed, at that time, I remember very well going to the Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Chrétien, Mr. John Chrétien, and asking him if he can give us the permission to have the largest hall in the Canadian Parliament so that we can change together the stereotype image of Islam. And indeed, it was a serenade of interfaith dialogue and love and compassionate in that large hall where we all met together in a prayer for love, a prayer for better understanding, and a prayer for human unity. And indeed, I do believe that this was one of the best advices you have given me. You said, actually, that public diplomacy is a valuable instrument which all nations can use effectively, and how the West need to open two-way communication with Muslim societies. You underlined the importance of constructive engagement, which can help in the process of healing and building trust, which means becoming companions on the journey to create empathy that will bring us closer to focus on the journey of pain and human suffering and build human trust. I learned from you and your experiences in conflict resolution, a rare expression. Create a coordinated pace of whirling together to develop a common perception so that we all gain. If we do not treat each other in the negotiation process as equals, we will all lose. Confronting the differences can make us discover our similarities because there is a human being in each one of us. And you told me, negotiate with velvet gloves. Yes, my dear mentor, that has become my motto in dealing with very tough negotiators. I had to deal with US aids. So, Mr. Ambassador, the velvet gloves, as we all have to do, because frankly speaking, we are all stakeholders. And I always say, as much as the American people need the words, the American people appreciate the Egyptian people, and the Egyptian people appreciate the American people and the history of the American people. You taught me how to whirl together with my counterparties, and I never give up until goals are achieved. And I do negotiate with a human face, and I do wear my velvet gloves. When I asked you about religion and how Islam is being jeopardized and twisted and abused to justify power struggle and exclusivity, you said, and I quote, "Religion becomes a pawn in the political game of nations," and you reminded me with your usual nodding of head and Arabic endorsing words. Ma'loom, ma'loom. Islam is becoming a cottage industry. It is like a river flowing from one land to another, collecting sediments on its way, and your job is to filter it. Accepting Islam's realities and diversity is the absolutely vital point of departure for approaching crucial questions about how Muslims can cope with global challenges in a constructive manner. I asked you about building bridges between East and West, and my muallim said it requires willingness to face both intellectual and practical challenges. We are all stakeholders. Unfortunately, in the West, Islam is being reduced to a set of fundamentalist practices that reject Western values. Together, we can build a positive awareness that can engage us as human beings. There is no instant transformation, however. Love is a dynamic force passing through us, which can be radiated to others to remind them that they are a nuclei in a whirling world. Then came another major, crucial issue when the Syrian conflict erupted. I asked my mentor to share with me his wisdom in view of his wide experience and unique understanding of Syrian affairs. His voice came loud and clear in 2013. And he said, "Let us all stop dehumanizing. Both the rebels and the government need to stop demonizing each other and recognize that all are Syrians. The decisions about Syria's future should be made by the Syrian people. Don't globalize the solution, localize it. And Syrians must speak out about what they want. Syrians need to develop a vision. Solutions should be built on basis of common humanity and the common good for all Syrians, minority or not, will need food, shelter, healthcare, and education. People in Syria want to live in peace and harmony. Yes, dear friends, let us remember that Albert Einstein told us, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. My mentor cautioned me about what we hear in the news and emphasized that until Damascus falls, Syria is holding. My dear friends, let me share with you the legacy of my mentor, who is the ambassador of peace and human diplomacy. My Muallim describes peace as a journey towards a place of mercy and justice, a process of being and doing. Peace is never made. It is both inner and external task. It is a long, hard path when we discover and accept inner peace and our authentic individuality. We accept the uniqueness of each person, who are sometimes described as the others. Peace is a transformational process at all levels of our being. My Muallim argues that his conceptual understanding of peace is influenced by his interpretation of Sufism, which simply underscores the purification of one's inner self as the path of peace. It further affirms that the individual spiritual path is connected to our responsibilities in society and to humanity. My Muallim argues that religion has never brought universal peace, despite its role at different points throughout history as a powerful force for peace and cultural harmony. However, when religion is twisted and corrupted, it leads to exclusivity and conflicts and polarization. My professor emphasized the importance of fostering intercultural and interreligious dialogue to demonstrate the viability of coexistence and provide vehicles for the collaborative formulation of hopeful visions where people-to-people activists can be enhanced. Our Muallim teach us the importance of education for global citizenship through a model of education that is flexible and able to become more dialogical and open-ended and less paternalistic. It is an education that can honor our traditions shared by the Abrahamic traditions, in which we all honor a God that teach us love, redemption, transformation, and salvation, coexistence and pluralism.